Roots and Rigour, Rigour and flow. Roots and Rigour, Rigour and flow. Roots and Rigour, Rigour and flow. Rigour and flow.
One. Welcome to Rigour and Flow with me, Aiwan.
And me, Amanda, and it's the show where business meets love.
And culture meets critique.
Yes, ma'am. We have another Feedwarmer.
At the end of season 2.
Yes, ma'am. So for this Feedwarmer, this is my selection, right?
Yes.
Okay. I have chosen...
Is it not your selection?
It is my selection.
Did you steal it from someone else? Can you give them back their feed warmer?
I did kind of steal it from someone else.
Oh, who did
Yeah.
you steal it from?
Well, I'm kind of feed warming your show. I'm feed warming a show that
I
you
have been stolen from.
I have pillaged from you once again, like I steal the socks from your drawer.
It is I.
It is I.
It is I that has been stolen from.
Well, you know, I do it at home as I do in business. Yeah. So I'm actually wanting to, the thing I chose does happen to be a show exec produced by you, but I've chosen it for reasons to do with my world and my interests.
Okay.
And the thing I wanted to bring was the 3-part podcast series, Our Place is Here, which you did with gal-dem.
Yes.
And it was, and Purpose, I think it was. Is that correct?
Purpose, Voices of Domestic Workers, Kanlungan, which I'm probably butchering, so I do apologise. But yeah, there was a few that came together, and it's one of the shows that I adored producing.
Really?
I loved it.
What did you love about it?
So what I loved about it is it was exactly what I like to do. It's storytelling, raw, honest storytelling from the voices of the people whose story it is. So they're telling their story in their own words. And their stories were incredible, powerful, moving. I found myself in tears in the recording session, like really trying to hold back tears and stay focused on the job at hand, which is to produce and to record these beautiful stories. I thought the women were brave. Their ability to really capture the moments in their life that really, some of them are quite harrowing, you know, what they went through to get from their country to this country, and then what they then encountered in this country whilst trying to survive. Yeah, I'm not going to take away from your thing, but yes.
It's actually really interesting hearing you talk about it, because we actually haven't talked about this show very
No,
much
we
at
haven't.
all. I think the only thing I knew was that this is a dual language show that you had worked on.
And it was my first time working on a dual language podcast.
Yeah.
And it's not even like the language is a European language where I might have some familiarity. It's a Filipino language called
Tagalog, right?
Tagalog, yeah.
Okay, right, yeah. I didn't know the name of the language before listening to this podcast series. But you've obviously kind of alluded to what the podcast is about. But for anybody who's not familiar with it, this podcast is the voices of Filipino domestic workers.
Yes.
Who, from what I picked up listening to the podcast, these Filipino domestic workers had worked with gal-dem as part of like a process of documenting their stories, writing essays about their experiences as domestic workers in the UK, many of them undocumented migrant workers. And then in the podcast, they read out and share the essays that they wrote.
Yes.
And what drew me to this is it's so much a connection to the thing I do as a researcher. So, for example, when I've worked with Black women who've been through the maternal health space, the most rewarding thing is listening to women tell their stories on their own terms, unfiltered and directly. But then not only that, taking those stories and using them to create change in terms of policy and action and to fight for certain kinds of rights.
Which is what these women were doing.
Exactly. And that was the draw for me. This whole process was attached to a campaign.
Yeah.
And so for me, it just seemed like this really great example of how you can use storytelling. You can see the podcasting or the essay writing process as a kind of action research, and then you can use it for change-based campaigns within particular communities of interest.
And that's the intersection I love. It's where art meets systems change. I've always loved that. Going back to my hip hop days, where, a song told in the right way, in that raw way, can actually impact the way people see a community, can impact the way legislation is put in place. I mean, I love that.
It's like holding up a mirror to society, and hip hop is a really good place for that, because things like police brutality, that's been some of the places where those themes are just laid bare. And it's that with this podcast too,
exactly. I'm very curious, which of the 3 episodes in this limited series are you bringing to the feed?
I loved all 3 of the episodes, and I really hope our listeners will listen to all of them. The one I've chosen is the story of Nina, and she just gives this totally powerful account of her very specific experience of womanhood in this country as a migrant worker. And I'm not going to give any spoilers. Let's just listen to the full thing. All of the essays are at under 15 minutes each, so I think we'll play you the full thing, and here it is.
I am here, but where is here beyond the mirror? Who am I in a world that fails to recognize me, that refuses to see this person I see?
From gal-dem, this is Our Place is Here, a collection of personal essays written and spoken by migrant domestic workers living in the UK. Developed by the Filipino Domestic Workers Association, Kanlungan Filipino Consortium, the Voice of Domestic Workers, and Kalayaan, this campaign puts the rights of migrant domestic workers at the forefront. In April 2012, Theresa May revoked the Overseas Domestic Workers Visa concession, removing hard-won rights for domestic workers. In the decade since, migrant domestic workers have been made incredibly vulnerable to exploitation and abuse because of the visa change. But migrant domestic workers have continued to build communities of support and resistance despite government policy. These are their stories in English and Filipino, written in their words and spoken by their voices. In this episode, we're hearing from Nina, a member of the Filipino Domestic Workers Association who moved to London from the Philippines in 2004. Her personal essay for gal-dem, Facing the Mirror, Unpacking the Personal and the Political, touches on her intersectional experience as a trans woman and a migrant domestic worker. Content warning. This essay contains sensitive topics, including mentions of transphobia.
Facing the mirror, unpacking the personal and the political. My favorite place is in front of the mirror. In front of the mirror, I see my history, my beauty, and all the places that mean so much to me. My hair, the lines on my face, and the blush on my cheeks trace my journey from past to present. I recognize traumas confronted and unresolved. Combing through my hair, I hear a secondary school bully taunt me for being weird and different, for being feminine. As I follow the lines on my face, I walk through a stranger's questions about my body, asking which parts I do and do not have. Through my makeup, I find the confidence to conjure up the person I feel I truly am. In front of the mirror, I observe how other people have made me the receptacle of their own shame. Still, it's also where I feel most present, where I feel truly here. I am here, but where is here beyond the mirror? Who am I in a world that fails to recognize me, that refuses to see this person I see? How do I locate myself in the here when nobody sees me? Being trans and undocumented is a disconcertingly dangerous thing to be. The first time I went out looking for work as a housekeeper, a prospective employer asked me for identification documents. For most people, that would be as easy as making a cup of tea or getting dressed for bed. But it is a lot more complicated for a trans woman with an irregular immigration status like me, who comes from a country that will never recognize my gender identity. I have no bank account, no driver's license, no utility bills in my name. All I have is a passport. But what is a passport but another nail driven into the coffin of oppression? I am trapped in this flimsy piece of paper that is meant to speak for me, to know me, a passport with a dead name, one that bears my likeness but has never been me. When I had my passport photo taken, I was told to tie my hair back, to not wear any makeup, to put on a shirt with a collar so stiff it felt like a guillotine. Not one piece of jewelry, not even a smile. That photograph isn't me. It's a flawed, dehumanizing system's idea of me. Being asked for proof of identification is an exercise in re-traumatization every single time. I decided to avoid that prospective employer, but that wasn't the last time it happened. It continues to happen. I have found some work now, fortunately, with people whose confidence in me as a capable housekeeper isn't tied to an ID. Isn't it ironic that the notorious serial killer, Dennis Nilsen of Muswell Hill, would have been hired immediately just because he had the driver's license and a bank account? What better illustrates this society's distrust and disrespect of domestic workers than the idea that asking for ID is excusable because employers are letting a stranger into their homes and that their safety is compromised? Aren't housekeepers going to a stranger's house too? Am I not also surrendering my fears for my own safety when I enter a prospective employer's residence? I remember one time I was cleaning a bachelor's flat while he was in his study, working, and chatting to friends on FaceTime. He suddenly appeared behind me, giving instructions. When I turned around to face him, he was holding his laptop with a camera facing my direction, making me visible to everyone he was speaking to. I felt violated, my privacy breached, my safety compromised. And that man and his friends probably found it humorous. Nowhere was there any consideration for my right to consent to being exposed in that manner. No apologies nor explanation given. Did he think he could violate my consent while still treating me with suspicion? Why does our society perceive domestic helpers as untrustworthy? Why does poverty and being a person of color equate with duplicity? I am made to feel like an outsider in this country because of my skin color and social status. Social and political stratifications like race and class shouldn't have to exist. Why do rich white people enjoy the benefit of the doubt? Wage domestic workers are here to do important work that allows a household to function, not to be someone's slaves. While most domestic workers are afforded the minimum wage, one's immigration status can add other complications to their lives. Those with irregular statuses like me are often given wages below the legislated minimum, with employers citing their status as a reason. I am lucky to not have had that experience, but I am more the exception than the rule. A vast majority, if not all domestic workers, are women of color, and the plight of domestic workers is only indicative of how society in general views a socio-political category that is woman. In a transphobic, racist, misogynist anti-immigrant society, where is here for me? I think the better question is, do I want to be here? To be a part of this society's current iteration? Can I choose otherwise? Because I would like to. I would like instead to help build a society where everyone can be present anywhere, anytime. A world where we won't need mirrors to help us locate ourselves and reflect our truths privately in our own locked-off selves. Instead, we would exist in a world where we can see ourselves reflected in the light of our shared humanity, where we can be seen in the image of other members of our community and in the world at large.
On next week's episode, we'll be hearing the moving readings and the panel discussion from the Evening of Storytelling at Refectorial Felix in Earl's Court, one of the hubs of the Filipino community in London. Migrant domestic workers and campaigners shared their experiences of taking part in the gal-dem creative writing workshops and the campaign. Following the panel discussion, the participants read out the essays they developed from the gal-dem workshop, telling the audience their lived experiences in the UK in their own words. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on the Our Place is Here campaign. On our website, gal-dem.com, that's gal-dem.com, you can read the essays and find out what you can do to support the campaign. This episode was created in partnership with the Our Place is Here campaign. Our Place is Here was produced by Aiwan and AiAi with production and sound design by AiAi Studios. The executive producers for gal-dem were Su Yin Haynes, Cece Peng, and Katie Go. The executive producer for the Our Place is Here campaign was Francesca Humey, supported by the Filipino Domestic Workers Association, Kanlungan, and the Voice of Domestic Workers, with graphics produced by Karis Peer and artwork produced by Khadija Saeed.
My natural thing to ask at the end of listening to an episode or an excerpt was to say, what did you think? What did you learn? But actually, I think for someone who thinks a lot as a researcher, actually, I want to change it and ask, what did you feel? Because I know how I felt when I listened to Nina's story.
I felt many things. I think actually a lot of sadness about what some women are navigating. So Nina is the only person in this series who identifies as a trans woman.
Yeah.
And there was just something so sad listening to her story about thinking about where does she feel like she belongs? Because I have this sense that she doesn't feel like some of the other stories. She belongs in her home, the country that she was raised in before she came to the UK. And also here she is navigating a whole set of vulnerabilities as a woman in a domestic worker scenario. And I feel like she doesn't really talk about this. Something so much in the unsaid that made me feel both sad and fiercely protective in some weird way of her, which is that as someone who's I was a nanny for several years in a totally different circumstance to her, but it's a place where if you're unsafe, it's deeply unsafe because there's something about the intimacy of being in someone's home and this very stark power dynamic that will happen between you and employer.
Yep.
You and your employer specifically. And I just felt to be a trans woman in that space would be horrific. And when I think about what's happening in the world right now around trans rights and gender recognition and the ridiculous amount of transphobia that has just become pervasive and normalized, especially with the Supreme Court's ruling recently. I just think this is already a group of people as migrants who are going rough, but now be a trans woman in that space, it's just horrific.
I can't fathom.
Yeah.
And it never occurred to me that there might be trans women amongst the domestic workers, the migrant domestic workers.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why I had to choose this one.
Yeah.
You know?
I think a lot of people listening wouldn't have even thought of that.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely.
I've asked you what you felt because I kind of wanted to just disrupt that straight to the thinking.
Yeah.
So I do want to ask, you know, what did you learn and what were some of your thoughts about Nina's story and the episode?
I mean, it reinforced some things that I knew but had never really heard in the voice of the women experiencing it quite that clearly, which was what it is to live with the constant hypervigilance. Every time you hear a siren, this isn't Nina's story specifically, but I remember one of the other stories goes on about constantly just walking around. When you hear a siren, you think they're there for you.
You know, I want to interject there because it reminds me so much growing up in Southeast London. A lot of I wouldn't say a lot, but certainly there were a few people in our church who were undocumented.
Yeah.
As we used to say, they didn't have their papers.
Yeah.
And coming back from church would be some of the trickiest moments because if a police car went by, you could see the fear, almost like a fight or flight or freeze thing
100%.
would happen. And sometimes the police would stop and they would bundle off people, just pick off people from our group and bundle them into the car and deport them. That was one of the biggest fears for members of our community, is being deported.
Yeah.
So that siren thing, I definitely can resonate with that.
Yeah. I mean, it was weird, not on that basis, but I thought of you as well listening to it because I have done or been around some research and union organising with domestic workers or cleaners specifically in higher education spaces. And as I listened to that, I thought about your mum actually going into the homes of wealthy people and what unspeakable things are not heard. Because even as I listened to these essays, one thing that I was aware of was there must have been a very trauma-informed approach because the women didn't over-disclose. They just consistently referred to difficult experiences as abuse.
Yeah.
And I was kind of glad of that because I didn't want, I didn't think it would have been right if it was really extractive.
Yeah.
But it did make me question, well, what actually happened? Because the vulnerability in an intimate space of a home must be far greater than in some contexts, I would have thought.
It is.
And
I've definitely had people in my life who've experienced some horrific things. And what I love about this series is that because it's their story in their words, they get to decide how much they give of their story into this public space.
Yeah.
And I like that they had that control.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Rather than the trauma porn that we often see in these spaces.
100%. That's something I really valued. And another reason why I brought it was like, there's a lot of people that can learn from how that was done.
Yeah.
Complete agency those women seem to have over their stories. I have several questions for you after listening to them all, and I probably can't ask them all. But I am curious about the process of what it was like for you working in Tagalog, because for each episode there's an English version and a Tagalog. Sorry if I'm butchering the pronunciation.
I loved the challenge, I have to say, because I'd never been presented with that kind of challenge before. And so what I ended up doing was I had the women's scripts or stories in Tagalog. And then I don't even think I had Yes, I had the English version and the Tagalog version, and I had them both on the screen. And then when they were recording the Tagalog version, obviously it doesn't match the English version, so I can't necessarily follow along in the English version. So what I ended up doing was just looking for the words in the Tagalog that were familiar as almost like my guide as to roughly where we were, and then really listening carefully to what they were saying and matching the words that they were saying to the Tagalog script, if that makes sense. And thankfully, the language isn't like, say, for example, like Chinese, which is like symbols that don't immediately translate to English.
Yeah.
Like there's
Don't use the same alphabet,
there's
for
the same
example.
alphabet, yeah. Whereas with Tagalog did have some of that. So it was easy for me to but I had to pay attention. At the end of that recording session, you know when your brain is
tired. I know those ones. Yeah.
It was so tired, but I was so grateful for the challenge. And it was our first dual language podcast.
Amazing. And how did the women respond to you, a non-Tagalog speaker, in the studio?
Oh, they were brilliant. They were really gentle with me. They were hilarious.
Really?
Do you know what I find funny with Filipino women? Their humour is just like the savage humour of the Nigerian.
Oh, really?
Aunties.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they were really, really, really good sense of humour.
Yeah.
They were brilliant in the studio, really responsive, because obviously as a producer and an audio engineer, I'm looking for certain nuances on certain lines and I'm having to draw that out for them, ask them to do several takes, sometimes of sequences that are actually quite difficult. You're asking someone to repeat a line that talks about abuse, for example, or a particularly traumatic moment in their story. But I need it for it to be clear because obviously this is it's a social impact podcast. And I want it to have that impact. I want it to have that emotional impact. And then where I found it challenging is in Tagalog, I don't always know if I'm getting the emotional impact because I don't understand the language. So tonally, I'm like, is it? Let's just go for another take and let's just try like pitch it up a little bit and then pitch it down and then we'll pick the one that makes sense. So anyone out there who does speak Tagalog, I'm very interested for you to listen and see whether the Tagalog version has the emotional impact that the English version has. I am actually very curious about that.
I would be curious. And I'm surprised that, maybe the partner organisations, or would they have been too polite and nice to, did they review it? What were their thoughts?
No, they definitely reviewed it and the feedback was great. Like they loved it. The email chain for that between Purpose, Kanlungan and the Voices of Domestic Workers, it was brilliant. They really loved it. I didn't ask specifically about the emotional thing, but the reviews was...
They loved it.
They really did. They were appreciative.
Okay. I do want to say one thing about the Tagalog versions is that I actually listened to them all.
No way.
I did. And I found just listening to them fascinating. First of all, there's something about hearing people speak in their native tongue, especially after you've heard them speak in their second language or other language that they have. And I found it somehow comforting to know that the women got to say the stories on their terms in their own voice without the need for to make themselves understandable.
Yes.
To the producer, actually. I really found that quite beautiful.
Yeah.
And then there were also other things I noticed. Like I found it really curious which words didn't have a Tagalog translation.
Yes.
And I found that to be a massive mirror as a researcher, an academic, and person who's involved in change work, because which words defied translation? Race, class, gender. Intersectional feminism. That came up in one of the pieces, which clearly one of the people wrote.
Yeah.
So I found that very interesting because language is one of the ways we make ourselves known to people. We often talk about it in the literatures on what we call epistemic injustice, right?
Yep.
If you don't share a language, how do you name an oppression?
Yes, that's true.
But also, where are the ways that we as academics are not making ourselves understandable because we're choosing to make big language or create new terms when we could just use terms that exist.
That's the one thing that drives me spare with academics is the use of jargon and big long words that nobody except other academics can understand.
Yeah.
And the work you're doing is so important, and yet nobody beyond your hallowed circles can understand it or decipher it.
Exactly. And I think it's very irritating when that happens when you're supposed to be doing accessible things. I think there are times when we do need to coin new language.
That's true.
And there are times when we coin new language and make it accessible, like Moya Bailey's term misogynoir.
Yes.
That's a great example of something that's really given Black women a language for something we experience, oppression at the intersection of race and gender, right?
Yes.
But by and large, there's way too much of that. So I loved noticing what words translated and which didn't. And there was another thing I loved, which was that for one of the essays in particular, I noticed quite a significant discrepancy in time between the Tagalog and the English version. So the English translation was something like 13 minutes and the Tagalog version was 17. And that told me something, because I was like, well, you as the producer...
lost in that 4 minutes?
Yes. And in a short podcast, that 4 minutes is long.
It is long.
And I was like, well, you as a producer probably don't know the difference between one version or another unless you stuck it in Google Translate.
Yep.
And that told me something else, which is that woman had used her agency
in
a very particular way, or
Yes.
claimed ownership of her story when speaking in her own terms in the way that she preferred.
In her own language.
Yeah. I loved noticing those things.
You know, I never thought about that.
Yeah.
This is why it's good to have a researcher listen to your work. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful observation on the show. Because I honestly have never thought about that. And that's amazing, because now I want to go back and listen to it.
And I want to translate it. Yeah. I want to take the Tagalog version, the English version, stick it in Google Translate and find out what the discrepancy was.
Yeah. I want to see what the results say. Because I don't actually want to do it, but I want you to do it and tell me what the results are.
Okay, I'll find time.
No, I'm playing.
Yeah, so that's it. Brilliant series. Thank you so much for putting it into the world. I really, really hope you'll give it a listen and see for yourself what you make of it, what that experience might be like.
And you can listen to all 3 episodes wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much to gal-dem. In particular, I worked closely with Suyin Haynes on the show, and she is a brilliant, amazing writer, journalist, thinker.
And now an academic as well, isn't she?
And an academic. She's now studying, and she's a person who really agitates for change in our systems. So definitely check her out as well.
Definitely. Thanks for joining us. See you next time on Rigour Inflow.
Thank you.